Well, I have a kind of like a follow-up question because well, it's not really a question, it's a comment, but do you think one of the from those studies that they see of the cities or countries that are banning certain things, it's more of like because of the ban, like let's say you're going to the store and there's no more, like I forget where it was, but there was no more plastic bags and people were bringing random, like they were bringing wagons to the stores and like making it not a joke out of it but making it fun, like it makes
Hmm.
you more aware and you're like, oh, maybe don't get this plastic bottle, or like it's not just the law itself of what it's banning, but it's like the awareness of what that law does. Do you think that has a
Right.
big aspect of it?
I do, of course. And I think a lot of it's social too. Like if you go to the store and everyone has their reusable bag except for you, and then you're kind of shamed for being the one that has a plastic water bottle or has a plastic bag or isn't following the norm of just being responsible and taking a little bit more seriously the sustainability issues, then yeah, I think it's the social pressures. I think it's raising awareness. And I also think people who help conduct beach cleanups become a lot more aware too, because sometimes you can be very blind to it until you train your brain how to see all the plastics on the beach. And then once you can see them, you kind of can't unsee them. So taking people to the beach who have conducted a lot of beach cleanups, all they see is trash, all they see is plastic. And then every time they go to touch a plastic item, they're much more aware of it. So I think getting people involved where it's possible, of course, and hands-on efforts is really, really effective too.
Yeah, I just realized once they close the beaches, I'm like, this would be the perfect time to do beach cleanups because no one's there to do more. But
Right.
even
Yeah,
if
you
it's
could do
a small
like an
group,
accumulation study.
exactly, if they let a small group of high school students to go clean up the beaches, then more protests would happen. So,
Right.
hmm.
Right.
Yeah, interesting thought. I mean, the cost benefit analysis of being out there right now, it's complicated to be sure. Our next question had to do with your partnership, Demi, with Future Frogmen. Whoever asked the question, please feel free to ask it in full.
Um, I think about like partnership with Future Frogmen, right? Okay, so I think my question was just for your partnership with Future Frogmen, are you planning on working with them on extended projects that go beyond just submitting data to NOAA? Basically, in other words, like, are there just any future projects you guys are planning?
Yeah, good question. And Richard, you can feel free to jump in here as well. And I would say absolutely. I mean, we work with partners in a lot of different ways. One of the main ways that we work with our partners in each region is through our grant funding program. So the Marine Debris Program offers 2 federal grant opportunities every year. So removal every year, and then we alternate between prevention and research. So people will submit applications to get funding from the Marine Debris Program to carry out their projects. And then we partner with them over the life of that grant, which is usually 2 to 3 years, and make sure that everything is kind of on track and working in its course. We also are involved in outreach efforts like this one. So if we can continue working with our partners to connect with different students, I think that's a really important way, probably the most important way that we partner with people. And of course, like I mentioned, we have our action plans in each of the regions as well. So if different partners sign up to take on different actions in their action plan, we're constantly in contact with them. So there's lots of ways that the Marine Debris Program tries to engage different partners in our region. So I don't know, Richard, if you want to add anything to that.
Jake, I'll just add that it's a relatively new relationship. I met Demi last fall. We worked together during a conference at MIT in Cambridge, Massachusetts, near Boston, and we've been staying in touch since. And I would love to further and grow the relationship and the partnership. So I think there are other possibilities that Demi just outlined, a few that may fit with our capabilities. So I'm looking forward to the future, pun intended.
And we have 2 more questions that were generated ahead of time. And then if anyone wants to open up to additional questions, I think Richard and Demi have a few more minutes. Having to do with sources of debris. And if you don't recall that was yours, I'll go ahead and ask it. What do you find as the major sources of marine debris? Not only the types, but where are these primarily coming from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's mostly identified as two source categories, ocean-based or land-based, right? So ocean-based debris items are those that are either dumped, swept, or blown from vessels or stationary platforms at sea. And this is things like derelict fishing gear or abandoned vessels or shipping or oil rig equipment, that sort of thing that would generate from the ocean. But the majority of marine debris is from land-based sources, and that's from intentional or unintentional littering or dumping into streams and rivers, water discharges, waste mismanagement practices, and that's how most of the trash gets out into the ocean. So a huge portion of the debris that is in the water is, of course, plastics. I think that's the kind of debris that gets the most attention. And especially because, like we were saying before, plastics can photodegrade. So over time, they break up into lots and lots of pieces. They accumulate in the ocean's gyres. We hear mostly about the Great Pacific Garbage Patch because there's been a lot of media around that, but there's actually 5 ocean gyres, of course. Debris is accumulating in all of them. And you know, the questions I think we need to be concerned about as far as how that's going to affect ocean ecosystems is ingestion. And that's, of course, just animals physically ingesting the plastics, but also are there additives or chemicals or coloring agents or plasticizers that are leaching or sorbing from those pieces as they're ingested or after they're egested? And we don't know the composition of all the plastic. So plastic is not just plastic. Of course, there's foam and there's filmed plastic. There's many, many different compositions of plastics, and we don't really know how those different compositions are affecting animals differently. So there's lots of sources and there's lots of questions that we still have about what's out there, what it's doing, what are the long-term consequences to animals in the ocean, the ecosystem as a whole, and to human health as well.
Sure. And, you know, we've been studying this, especially folks in honors at this point in the class, both bioaccumulation and biomagnification, and kind of teasing apart the two different concepts. And it just sounds like a really complicated bit of work ahead for those who are, you know, stewards of the environment, to try to figure out, okay, how are these things accumulating or magnifying in the food chain, and what are these different chemicals doing?
Right.
So we have one more question, which yokes together the non-living with the living once more, having to do with indicators. If that was your question, please go ahead and ask it.
Hi. Yeah. So what? How do you use like indicator species in your studies? Like plastic is affecting animals and such like that. Is there anything indicator species are doing to help you out in figuring that out?
That's a really good question. And I think the answer is we're still trying to figure out which are indicator species for plastic pollution. So an example I'll point to is a lot of our research partners in New England are using shellfish, oysters, and scallops to see how they are either selectively ingesting and then egesting fibers and microplastic pellets. And I think the science is, this is not published work yet, but I think the science is starting to point to shellfish may not be great indicator species of how much plastic is present in an environment, because it turns out they can reject a lot of the plastics that they ingest through their pseudofeces. So they might not be, if you just catch a scallop and look inside and say, oh, this must be a representation of how much plastic is there in the place where that scallop lived, it might not be, because they're spitting a lot of it out. Whereas birds, like albatross, can ingest all the plastic, and then they've been observed feeding it to their chicks, and they have no distinction between what's plastic and what's actually food for them. So they might be a better indicator of what's in the area. So I think we are trying to find indicator species, but I think there's still some questions about who those might be.
Yeah, and I'm sure that's complicated because, you know, albatross are available in certain climates, and given their behaviors, it's useful, but it would probably be great to be able to have multiple indicator species for any given region because of differences therein in behavior and ingestion, et cetera. And it's complicated.
Right. Very complicated, yeah.
Do we have any other questions that just came to mind before kind of turning to the next segment here? Yeah, Kevin.
You said before about working with lobster fishers and changing their materials that they use. Are they compliant with it? Like, do they change
That is a good question, and some are very open to it. I think they're heavily invested in marine conservation as well, because that's their livelihood, right? They have a vested interest in making sure that the ocean is healthy because they want to be lobstermen. So some of them are really open to change and open to cleanups, and they help with removal efforts and are totally on board. And some of them, as you might imagine, are just salty New Englanders who are very stuck in their ways, and those require a little bit more behavior change science, I'll say.
Excellent question, Kevin. Really important to know if who's on board and who isn't. Any others? Yeah, Isabella, go ahead.
Question. So is there, so are you, is your group trying to go at this from a legal aspect, trying to get laws passed where like fishermen have to use a certain protocol, they have to use a certain like product that's eco-friendly, like there's illegal? Are you trying to go at it from a legal point?
That is a really good question. Because I work for the federal government, we don't really have a political stance, and we don't, the Marine Debris Program specifically doesn't generate laws or enforce laws.
Yeah.
But we have advocacy partners, of course, that advocate for certain changes. Right now in New England, this is a whole nother topic that we can talk about at a different time, but there's a lot of talk about changing lobster rules in New England right now because of right whale entanglements. The vertical lines that go from the surface buoy down to the first pot are thought to be causing a lot of right whale entanglements. They're, of course, critically endangered. So NOAA Fisheries, which is a different division of NOAA, is working on the recommendations of changing those rules, but the Marine Debris Program doesn't do anything with law or policy.
Okay, so but you do have an advocate that like sees the problem, is like, okay guys, like we should make a law about this. We should push for it.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of partners who do work like that. We just don't do it personally ourselves.
Okay, perfect.
How do you think this pandemic is going to affect the way marine debris is? Because there's a lot of single-use plastics, I know, going around with like rubber gloves and masks and things like that, but it's all very necessary. What can you imagine coming from that?
You know what, that's a great question, and we've been thinking about it a lot, and I think it's just going to take some more thought. And I mean, I would love to, tell people that it's still safe to use your reusables, and learning how long the virus lives on, for example, cloth and plastic, and comparing those two things. Even how we, like you're saying, there's gloves and masks littered everywhere, how we conduct beach cleanups. Like, is it safe for anybody to just go to the beach and pick up things they see? I don't know. And I think right now, I mean, my family has been personally affected by the virus. I'm sure some of you guys have too. And I am just very, very cautious, and I don't think I'm in a place yet to give anybody guidance about how to do this best. So unfortunately, for the time being, I think everyone just needs to keep themselves safe and follow the CDC guidelines for what is safe and what isn't. And then once we kind of come out of this, I'm sure that my program and many others will kind of sit down and talk about how we can move forward and how people can still choose sustainability in a time of so much uncertainty. There's good news, right? In that there's less people out traveling and definitely visiting beaches and doing other recreational activities that could cause marine debris. So we could see a decline in those types of things, but definitely an increase in the number of single-use things, especially medical single-use items that are being used right now that we'll all have to consider.
It's an impressive question, because I think there's definitely the assumption that with decreased industry, decrease travel, that it's automatically going to mean that this is a good time for the oceans, but
Right.
It could be more complicated than that. And what I just appreciate so much about these students is that they're always thinking about how their behaviors, they're really mindful of how their behavior affects larger systems, but also trying to think about larger systems insofar as what they can do to make some good small changes.
Right.
Well, you guys, I just want to thank Ms. Fox and Mr. Hyman. Thank you both so much for kind of brokering this conversation today. I'm sure we'll have further questions that percolate up, but we're really appreciative. So thank you guys both.
You're
And
welcome.
best of luck to your family too.
Thank you. Yeah,
I
thanks
know
very much. And you guys too.
Thank you, Demi. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, class. Great questions. It was fun to be with you today.
Thanks for watching. For more information, visit our website at www.futurefrogmen.org.